We have a guest in the studio now. We're going to talk about cybercrime. Before we welcome and introduce the guest, CT has the proverb.
Right. We're back to DRC. Mm-hmm. He who does not like chattering women must stay a bachelor.
He who does not like chattering women.
Yes.
Must stay a bachelor.
Yes.
Okay. Explain.
You know, I didn't write this proverb.
Yeah, so you explain
it. I think chattering here is being used figuratively in that women don't just chatter. Human beings don't just talk. They do other things. But I think what they're saying is somebody who does not understand how women go about their business, but thinks of women with reference to how men think and what men like, that person will not marry.
No?
No, they will not. They may make attempts at it, but it will most certainly not work. No, it won't work.
Aye.
Because for it to work, you need to take a pause, take a deep breath and figure out how it is that women go about their business, how they think, how they reason. But if you take the view as a man that your perspective is what must be used as the rule book, then sorry, not going to work.
So some men consider getting an opinion from a woman as chattering.
Not only chattering, they consider it to be a complete waste of time.
It's a nuisance.
Yes, and yet that's the thing. They miss the point completely, because that very opinion that you may be dismissing is what you need, because it's an alternate opinion that you personally cannot arrive at a man because of the way you look at things.
Okay.
Yes.
So the chattering here is in the context of, in the interpretation of this man, the woman is chattering. And so the proverb is telling you, if you don't like that, what you consider chattering, then you must not marry.
Yes. Within
If
that,
you do
Because
not
you're going to
want-
get a full load of it should you get married.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
If you do not want a second opinion, if you don't want input from your partner,
Yes.
then
and if you
by
don't want
yourself.
it,
Don't get a partner.
and if you don't want it delivered in the manner that is being delivered, then you're going to have a problem.
Neil Walsh is a regional representative at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime for Eastern Africa. Neil, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation,
Thank you.
the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Great. It's so nice to be here. Thanks.
When you hear that proverb from the DRC, does it make sense to you? Do you relate?
Oh, as a diplomat, I think that's going to be the most diplomatic answer ever, which is I didn't hear a thing there. Or I'll refer you to my wife. Might be a safer answer.
Okay, nicely played. Neil, what is this United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime?
So thanks again for having me. And I know we're live across 7 counties in the country. I really appreciate that. We are the part of the UN that helps cops, prosecutors, judges, intelligence officers to do their jobs better, to try and understand what the threat looks like, to try and help how to investigate, how to give them skill sets, not just in Kenya, but around the world. And I'm lucky enough to have a team of nearly 200 people that cover Eastern Africa. And it's across all the different types of crime: terrorism, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, child abuse, you name it. That's what we're good at doing.
So what do you do? I mean, the police, we have a national and independent police service in Kenya, and they know what their job is. Their job is law enforcement and fighting and tackling crime. And they know the definition of crime. They know whether it's petty crime to the grand crime.
Yep.
Okay. So what do? You come and remind them what this is?
So our work is looking at transnational, international organised crime, counter-terrorism, and helping states to build even greater skill sets at taking on the biggest challenges that we face, the most difficult criminals and terrorists that we face. A lot of that's helping to work between countries. So you've got really capable investigators and prosecutors and judges in Kenya. How do we help share that evidence, share that intelligence with other countries in the region, around the world, to help get the evidence you need to put the people that harm you most into prison?
Interesting. Are we looking at a cross-board here?
Yep.
Because this year, and maybe now going towards the end of last year as well, we saw a lot of heavy engagement then when it came to keeping children safe online. Yep. But then now here we are talking about, more interconnected, more intertwined crime that takes place on the internet, going as far up as terrorism and things like this. So, I mean, it starts where you're talking about, stalking children on the internet to things like, rape and abuse and things like this. And then as far as terrorism, so are we going across board?
Exactly. And it's all of these are blended threats now. And to give you a sense of scale of the threat that we look at, before I joined the UN, I was a cop for nearly 20 years. And 20 years ago, looking at the threat against kids, online, offline, it was relatively low. To give you a scale of this now, there's an organisation in the US called the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. They receive reports from the online service providers, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks. And last year, of child abuse material on the internet, they received 30 million images or 30 million reports. And each one of those reports can have hundreds or thousands of images.
Different reports?
Different reports. Okay, so 30 million in one country from their service providers in the US. If you start to look at that around the world, you start to get a sense of the scale of the threat that we face and that our children face online and the devices that we carry with us all the time. So our job is to try and do something about that, because with a scale of that size, it's not a policing solution.
Right.
Right? You can't arrest your way out of a number like that. So it's how do you apply technology to try and make that different? How do you help kids and adults to make decisions that keep them safe? How do you make that easier for countries around the world to work together? And that's really what we're about.
If we go into the detail, when we hear this a lot, the leaning is that the initial thing is that, all right, it's not that serious. I can put tags on your gadget and you'll be all right. But what are we talking about here? How dangerous are we talking about?
So we get this question all the time. How do I control the device?
Yeah.
And we're looking at it the wrong way. It's decision making and behavior that really makes a difference. You think back to when you're a kid and your parents say, don't do that. And you instantly think, yeah, I'm going to go and do that. So it's how do we manage and mitigate that risk? We used to see 10, 15, 20 years ago for a child to be groomed, especially online, it would take weeks, months, maybe even years.
Yeah.
Now we see children playing live online games. So they're playing on the internet live games and they can be groomed in minutes. And it can go from no conversation with someone they think is a peer of their age. They might think they're talking to another teenage boy, teenage girl, but it's actually an adult masquerading. And that they will turn the conversation from the game into something immediately high-risk sexual behaviour in seconds. So that comes back to it. This is an education solution. This is a prevention-based solution where we help our kids, help our teenagers, help mums and dads to understand what this looks like and what we can do to actually have an impact on it.
And what is it that they need to do? Just briefly.
So we start first off with understanding what does the threat feel like. If someone does X, is that normal? If something feels wrong to you as an individual, you get the hair in the back of your neck standing up. Something feels unpleasant. Someone's asking you a question that's grossly inappropriate. Then what do? And it's always reminding our kids and our adults, if something happens online, you are in control. It's not the other person. You can turn it off. You can step away from it. You need to be able to speak about it. And that's why addressing taboos, talking about things like this is often really uncomfortable. And I've had that conversation with my own kids. But helping them to understand that they're not going to get in trouble, that they need to be able to seek help. That is the start of that solution, and making really good decisions online. If someone asks you to do something that you're not happy with, that you're uncomfortable with, then that's the moment to do something about it before you go down a really dangerous path.
Given the numbers that you speak of, and I'm sure there are more numbers that one can speak of with regards to what you do, why do I get this tingling sensation and hair sort of like standing on my hand that what one may call deviant or criminal behavior seems to be on the rise?
It's a really good question. I think there's a combination. Whether it's on the rise or not, I think there's still a lot of questions on that. But the ability to do it has become much easier, right? If you think back to when we were kids, we didn't have devices that like this. I went to uni when we didn't have the internet. So I've reached that age now, sadly, where now looking back at the power that we have in our pockets.
Yes.
And when my kids have got their phones or laptops out and doing schoolwork, it really still makes me nervous of what are they exposed to? Are they getting the education from me, from school, on what does this look like and how do we manage that? So is the criminality on the rise? Possibly, but the ability to do it has become much, much easier.
You see, why I asked the question, the conversation around preventing it, curtailing it, supervising, ensuring, yes, if the opportunity presents itself, it doesn't necessarily necessitate that people must take advantage of this. But the reason, if I look at the preventative discussions around such matters, it tells me that people are partaking of those opportunities,
Yes.
and in greater numbers.
And that's it, because the opportunity, if we look back, the scale of this threat changed massively last year because of COVID and lockdowns. So we saw everybody around the world doing much more stuff online than they were before. So the victim pool becomes massively increased.
Yeah.
And if you're a man or a woman of badness, and there's often a perception that sex offenders are men only, it's not, it's women as well. Significantly less, it's probably in the point something %, but it still happens. So when you have an increased victim pool, and your kids haven't been educated or told what this looks like, and often because our teachers and our caregivers haven't been given that information, then it's harder to try and help them to manage their way through that. And I think it's incumbent on us now as a society to try and help manage and prevent and predict these risks rather than trying to deal with it after it's already happened.
Sure.
As somebody who's been in law enforcement yourself, when you talk about cybercrime, how difficult is it to catch the perpetrator?
It's a great question, because we start off with what is cybercrime. There's no internationally agreed definition of it at the moment. There's actually a discussion in New York this week as part of an ongoing UN process with all the countries of the world to try and define what this is and work a way forward with it. But if we put that to one side, we start to look at what does it feel like to us. We've all received the scam emails. You've won the lottery that you never played.
Yes,
You know, you've got a cousin who died in somewhere else and they've left you this amount of money. All you've got to do is pay us $5,000 and it'll all be fine. So part of that is looking at what do we define, what do we expect policing to do, what can we do ourselves to mitigate and manage that risk. So there's lots of different areas that we can look at. We can talk about cyber-dependent crime, which is the type of crime where you need a computer to do it, or some sort of online device, or cyber-enabled crime, the online sort of frauds that you can complete offline as well. If I wanted to steal your money 20 years ago, I need your bank card and maybe try and clone that, whereas now I send you an email pretending to be your bank, something like that.
Yep.
So getting the scale of that, it is principally, again, financially driven. Most organised crime and terrorism is profit driven. So one of the solutions for us in that is going after the illicit finances and going after the profit behind it, because that really gets in the face of the bad guys that are doing it.
Sure. So, I mean, you talked about, and I think here we get into a bit of a quagmire, because you talk about, all right, something that we never saw before. The world goes into lockdown for 2.5 years. Many countries only just coming out of it today. So that meant you had to go digital if you were going to be sustainable.
Correct.
With your business, right? But at the same time, we're saying, in as much as you were advancing as a business, advancing as countries, the threat,
The risk increases.
the risk also increases.
Yep.
So then how are businesses then advised, in as much as you want to advance, you must also realize that this danger.
Got it. Exactly. So you can't keep everything safe. And we've got to start from that premise that if someone tells you that there is a sort of golden solution to cybersecurity and you buy this one thing and put it in your devices and you're fine, they're not telling you the truth. So it's the advice that we give to government, give to business, give to individuals like us is, what are the things that are most important to you? What is business critical to you, to this radio station functioning right now? If you lost control of your production software or all this kit that we're sitting in front of goes down, you're off air. So this is the bit that you protect fundamentally around that. And it's the same for every business, knowing what is critical to what you do and how do you put protective measures, almost like an onion, around that. Lots of stuff we can mitigate by doing basic measures, which is sometimes thinking it through. You get the weird email with an attachment on it saying, here's the bill, and you weren't expecting the bill, or something. We all know what those things look like. And human nature wants to click on stuff. And it's that, just don't click on the damn thing. Take a breath and wait and think, were you expecting to get that?
Yes.
Because those are the things that we can reduce the risk by some 90-something% of just not clicking on something and deleting. You weren't going to win that lottery. You know, your aunt that you'd never heard of has not died and they're not getting offered a load of money. Don't click on the thing. So that helps us to bring all of that risk down and then focus on the key things that really matter to us, and that we don't take this kit offline, or a hospital falls over, or ransomware takes control of all of our devices and costs us a hell of a lot of money.
So you've said there is cyber-dependent crime and the other cyber crimes.
Yep.
A lot of the things that we hear of is a system has been hacked,
Yep.
and somebody has taken control of either your computer and they're demanding a ransom for it, or somebody has just basically taken up. We see it all the time. You've gone into one of the government websites and you find different content has been posted there. The world famous anonymous group, they have taken over this particular, function or website. So those are what? Those are hackers.
Yeah,
And principally they're hackers. And what is their main motivation?
So there's a number of motivations. If you look at hacking of, for example, a government website, often it will be political in nature. There will be a political desire behind that. To identify who the actor behind that is really quite tricky. But it can be for profit as well. There are lots of people and lots of cyber criminals who will offer a service. We use the term cybercrime as a service. So if you or I wanted to become a man of badness today, we don't have the technical skill set to do it. We can go onto the darknet, an encrypted part of the internet, and hire someone, drop of a hat, pay them using cryptocurrency, which we can exchange from M-Pesa into a cryptocurrency, pay them, you don't even know who they are, and they will do it for you. So you might do it just because you want to irritate someone. We've seen this. We've seen, for example, I remember some years back, the average age of an international drug trafficker was late 30s, early 40s at a high level. Average age of a high-level, capable cyber criminal was 18. Because we look at the technical skill set, the ability to develop and manage software and hardware and do your business. So looking at the motivation, I think, is a really important question, because that allows us then to try and predict the risk and take action against them when it happens.
Then there's the other side, where somebody actually gets onto, and we've seen this a number of times recently, somebody gets access onto your online banking credentials and wipes your account clean.
Yeah.
And you go complaining to the bank, and the bank says, we don't know your password. So how is that played out?
So this comes back. We used to have the advice some years ago that you change your password for stuff. You remember you always got the email change. You had to change it every 8 weeks or 12 weeks.
Yeah, and you get
That
to a
is
point
now-
where you can't remember the password
Exactly.
to use.
Or you write it down, or you make it like password 1 2 3 4 exclamation mark. So the advice now is actually, we've turned that on its head, is don't change a password unless there is any reason to think that it's been compromised, because then we do things that are more complex. And all of our phones and our laptops have the ability to generate really complex passwords. You then use your thumbprint or your face to unlock it, so you don't have to remember the complexity of it. So that makes it much harder. But if your device is compromised, that's when the onus is on all of us to try and contact our banks or whomever it is and say, I think this has happened. I was on holiday with my wife and kids back with my parents in Ireland 2 weeks ago, running through Heathrow Airport, lose my wallet, credit cards, MFA ID, everything gone.
Everything gone.
And of course, I only realise it when I'm back here, having been on the plane for 9 hours. So it's my job, responsibly, to then contact my bank straight away and say, cancel all the stuff. So we have to apply that level of thinking of losing a wallet or a card to if you think your device has been compromised. And the key thing there is, it's obvious, but not sharing passwords. Or not reusing passwords across multiple different services. So if you have the same password for your email, for your bank, for your life, that's really increasing your risk. And if it's an easy one to guess, if it's something like your birthday or your partner, your kid's name,
Or
then
password 1 2 3
Exactly.
exclamation mark.
there is actually there is a list. If you Google it, you can find lists of compromised passwords, and it's amazing that people still use these. So there's an element of that where the onus is on us to try and mitigate and manage that risk, but also there's the responsibility on the service providers as well to have as high-end cybersecurity as they can.
Yeah.
Neil, someone could actually come to you and argue that I have not shared my password with anybody. I have not shared my laptop with anybody. I have only accessed my online banking platform through this laptop. Everywhere I've been to. But still, it was compromised. How did it happen?
So the most common places for things like this to be compromised is on public Wi-Fi. And if you could be going through an airport, in a hotel, things like that. And again, if you wanted to be the cyber criminal trying to gather information like that, you set up a Wi-Fi hotspot and you call it public Wi-Fi or airport or whatever. It's the most basic espionage trick as well for governments to turn up at a location of interest and say, here's your Wi-Fi, free log on, and everybody jumps on it straight away. You then get all of that data coming through that device. And if we look at the highest end capabilities, if you pay for some of the most high-end attack capabilities, they're really very, very good. So if I wanted to target you, then I pay someone to do that. The likelihood of you defending against that attack is very, very low because it's so highly capable. So it's back to we can reduce most of these threats just by being a bit more sensible. Something I put on all my devices is a virtual private network, a VPN, which means the moment I turn my phone or my laptop on, it encrypts all the stuff on that connecting to a Wi-Fi. So even if that Wi-Fi is compromised, no one can read what's going through it from my device. It's just jumble of stuff that they can't decrypt. There's free versions out there, but I'd suggest that if it's free, you're probably the product. So it's worth paying for it, even if it's a small amount of money. It secures your device. And being really cognizant of what you're doing. If you're in a hotel or in an airport, don't do your banking on Wi-Fi. Really reduce that down. It is much safer to do it on the data network rather than on the Wi-Fi, because you don't actually know the network that you're logging onto. You don't know what records they're keeping, how much of that is stored, how much of that is kept. So it's thinking our way through. If you're walking down the street today and someone says, "Oh, do you mind popping your clothes off and letting me take a picture?" You think, no, probably not.
Probably not today.
But online, you might get that and think, I'll take the risk. Or if you're walking down the street and someone says, "Give me your credit card and your PIN number," you say, "No, thanks very much." But if you log on a public Wi-Fi that's unencrypted, you're basically doing the same thing. So it's applying our way of thinking through our risks that, and you know, we've seen this when we speak to kids and teenagers, that their perception of risk is so different to ours as adults, where we see online and offline as a separate thing. For them, it's just one big blended experience, and it's having the same risk mitigation measures and critical thinking skills that they're doing online and offline.
You know, I'm listening, and what I'm seeing is a mouse on a treadmill. Because on the one hand, solutions are being found for a problem, and guaranteed that solution with time will be overtaken by new problems, and a new solution will have to be found.
But that's life, right?
You've gotten it. That's why I'm asking, must it be life? Because, in all honesty, it takes me back to the question I actually asked. Is it that we're saying that what this technological advancement has done, it has brought out the worst in us?
I don't know, I might challenge you on that.
I'd like you to.
I think there is always bad elements in things. You can always use something. If we look at nuclear disarmament, they have a term of dual use. Things that can be used for badness and making weapons, and things that are used for good. But anything can be dual use technology, right? If you take that bottle and smack me over the head with it, then it's been used for something that it wasn't intended. So we always have to predict risk. We look at when we had cars that didn't have seatbelts and didn't have airbags, then we managed that risk. We knew there was high risk around that. So I think what we have to do is apply better thinking to how we understand this, and that's why having conversations like these is so important, and it's so nice that you're able to do this, because when we don't have these conversations, people think, "Oh, this is a tiny thing, it's not going to happen to me." And then the moment you're down that sort of rabbit hole, it's really difficult to get out of. And technology has made it easier, I think, in some ways to commit crime, without doubt. But the advantages that we get from it vastly outweigh the risk. If we turn the clock back and say, well, it's this sort of Luddite thing of destroying tractors and saying, well, we want to go back to doing things by hand. How our economies grow, how we scale the economy, how we, Kenya is the shining light economically in the continent. So if you didn't have the technological skill sets and investment that you have here, I think it would be much, much worse off. But it's always having that conversation of bringing the security element into the growth. Trying to do them separately doesn't work.
Sure.
And
you know what I'm trying to say actually is that I'm going to say it's a business.
It is, without doubt.
A big business, because one doesn't function without the other.
Without doubt.
You have a situation where the term I keep coming across is, Eric, we're going on a break, are we?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on the break.
What's the term? What's the term?
Malware.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
So, CT, that term again?
Malware.
Mal what?
Malware. I've often wondered what it's short for. Is it malicious ware?
It is.
Malware.
Malware.
So, what is it?
So malware, malicious software, things that compromise your phone, your laptop, your tablet. And that's when what we were talking about just before the break on when you lose control of something and you think, I've been great, I haven't given my password to anybody. It's principally malware that steals those credentials and allows someone to pretend to be you. And it can happen very easily by you go onto a compromised website. Often porn sites are loaded with stuff like this because they know. Because it's the embarrassment factor of you're not going to go to the cops or go to someone and say, I was,
participating.
Sure, if that's the wasn't the word I was going to go for. I can go with it.
I was participating in a certain cultural activity.
And therein is where I suspect.
Write that
Yes.
down. So sites like that often compromised with malware, and if you, let's say you search for something online, be really judicious in the link that you go to click. Or if you get that email that says, hi, it's your bank, your user details have been compromised, please click here. Now, that often can be real, but it can often be malicious as well. So it's looking at the address that an email comes from, even if it says it's come from kcb.ke, click on the email address at the top of your email. That will display the real email below it. And then you'll see, actually, it came from neil.walsh at. And then you can start to judge on whether that's safe or not. But often that's where malware hits your device. And once it's there, it's often quite challenging to get rid of it. And that then means that if your device is compromised, you don't know about it. Basically, whoever deployed that now owns your phone or your laptop. They can see everything on it. They can do everything with it. And to the most intrusive of stuff called spyware, that can have total control of the device, where the cameras are always on, the microphone is always on, the geolocation is on, the Bluetooth is on, and it doesn't matter what encrypted apps you use, like WhatsApp or Signal or anything else. If the device itself is compromised, the individual who has done that to you can see everything on your device. Nice, huh?
What?
Yep.
And they can do that without you knowing that they actually have access to your device.
Exactly. So the most extreme, and there is some really horrendous software out there right now. It started off being sold to some governments as an espionage tool, but then the problem with all of these things is they get proliferated around the world, and others will then develop similar types of that. And people just start buying it and using it themselves. Often in a term called stalkerware, which is principally men targeting women, trying to understand where is their partner, trying to understand what the phone is being used for, and really having control in a very, very unhealthy and dangerous relationship. But that's the problem with these things now, if it's on the device. And I think the natural question that comes out of that is, well, how do I know if that stuff is there?
Yep.
It is hard to do it directly, but there are things that are a good telltale sign of your device being compromised. If your battery is dropping off like that and you're not doing anything on it, then there is something happening on the device. If your phone is hot, if you're sitting with a laptop or a desktop computer, you hear the fan whirring on it because it's running something, but you're not doing anything outside of the ordinary, something is happening on that device. So that's when, if you feel something like that, there's a number of different actions you can take, and it depends on the type of phone you have. For example, if it's an iPhone or an Android or something else. But the way of getting rid of most of this stuff is doing a factory reset. Now, I know that's a pain in the bum because you lose everything on the device. And not resetting the device from a cloud backup, because if the device is compromised, it's also on the cloud.
Ooh.
So you might have to do a full reset, which is why having a backup of your photos and any of the things that are really dear to your heart, have it on cloud, certainly. Have an offline copy as well. Because that way, if you have to crash everything and start again, you've still got the things that you care about. But these are the things that compromise devices now and what we have to be aware of. Most of us will never face stuff like this, but some of us will. And by understanding what the activity, what the behavior on a device looks like, then we start to understand it. And I think it's back to your point earlier of why is this happening? Is it because there is more people doing it? There's more people with skill set to do it now than there was before, without doubt. And the ability to do things and commit crime like this has become easier for those with capability and harder for government and law enforcement to defend against, because the techniques and the technologies are so difficult. So it's a more broad threat landscape, but we can do things about it, which is back to those important things of not clicking on stuff that we don't expect to see.
Hey, this isn't the wild, wild west. This is the horribly horrible wild, wild west. Now, if that is the reality that you describe, what then becomes of a financial tool that is referred to as cryptocurrency, which apparently is a child of this very, very system that we are speaking of?
So cryptocurrencies, for those who have never heard of them before or used them, are a way of moving value. But it's not centralized. There's no central bank in the middle of it. There's no person or company involved. And might surprise you, Kenya is the world leader in peer-to-peer cryptocurrency sharing, which
Say that
means
again,
if I had cryptocurrency and you have cryptocurrency and we're sharing it with each other without going through a third party, Kenya is the top country on the planet in sharing value.
Top as in number one globally.
Globally. And you are number 5 in the world in the volume of cryptocurrencies that are used and shared.
What does that mean?
So that means that in
people,
all the countries
so we are
on Earth,
trading, Sisi and
volume
I
of
trade using proper currency, and we use M-Pesa and cash.
Yep.
There are people in this country who are using crypto to trade.
Exactly. So you've got the study I looked at just this morning coming down is 8.5% of Kenyans own cryptocurrency.
8.5%.
8.5%, and that's significantly more than the rest. Of
So
the world.
now, when you talk about the position that Kenya holds, is it in terms of the number of people, or is it in terms of the value that they keep
It's
it?
the value. So it's the value and the number of trading. So on the number one bit of sharing between individuals, that's the number of people doing it. And the value places you at number 5 globally in moving cryptocurrency.
So you're saying the value of the cryptocurrency that finds its way into Kenya and does its merry-go-round in Kenya, in terms of value, even if you were to place it against a certain currency, we are number 5.
Correct. Yes. And that's the volume that you're moving into and out of the country. And to give a sense of this, Bitcoin is the one that most people have heard of. It's still the most popular. 1 Bitcoin, as of this morning, would cost you 2.6 million shillings
Sorry,
to buy.
you just repeat that so that I can absorb it. 1 Bitcoin is equal to?
2.6 million shilling. And this time last year, it was worth nearly 9 million shilling.
1 Bitcoin.
1 Bitcoin.
So you recommend that if someone is to pay me, they should pay me in Bitcoin?
I do not. I do not. It's rare to get someone from the UN taking a position on something.
Neil.
So all the glitters is not gold.
So why? Okay, number one, when we say that Kenya leads in terms of peer-to-peer cryptocurrency transactions,
Yep.
what is it within country or peer-to-peer?
It can be anywhere
Somebody
around the world.
in Kenya
So it's-
with somebody in the world, but there's
Through
a Kenya.
There will be a person or entity in Kenya that is taking and receiving. So
What kind of trades are these?
So we see individuals using it, people just wanting to share value. So if you look at, you could be using a mobile money and that you get charged for every transaction that you make.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency doesn't necessarily have that charge, or it's much, much smaller. But I think what really encouraged and attracted people to using it was the exchange rate of Bitcoin was crazy in the past couple of years. It's existed for just over 9.5 years. When it started, it was in dollars, $150 for 1 Bitcoin, and now we're at 29,000 today. Last year was 70,000 US dollars. So people investing in that had the potential to make enormous amounts of money very, very quickly. And I think that's where we see a massive risk as well, because this is volatile. People have heard cryptocurrencies described as simply another currency. It's not. It's like gambling. You have no idea how the chips are going to fall for you, because the moment someone, let's say a popular celebrity, tweets something about it, and you can see the exchange rate plummet in
And you
seconds.
must it in different kind of languages.
Yep, exactly. So the risk around that is enormous. We've seen people around the world, this has happened in Kenya, but every country where cryptocurrencies are used, losing enormous amounts of money to scams where they think they're investing in a real cryptocurrency. There's 20-something thousand cryptocurrencies in existence.
So let me ask this question. So what is a cryptocurrency really?
It's ones and zeros. It's digits. It doesn't exist in real life. I couldn't physically give you one right now. Right? I couldn't print one off and give it to you. It's like when you move money between banks, okay, you don't see the cash physically moving.
No, you don't. Yes, no, you don't.
But you could go and get that. If you want to go to
Go
your
to the
account and
bank.
clear it, you'll walk out.
That is the difference.
Exactly. So the way cryptocurrencies become real hard fiat cash is you exchange it from Bitcoin into shilling,
can convert it
Bitcoin
to
into
hard currency.
M-Pesa, Bitcoin into whichever, and then cash it out.
But is that not a system that is very similar to what is used in everyday banking? Because essentially what you're trading with is actually trust.
Right. So, and the challenge with the trust element of this is, and this is where we see it go wrong, cryptocurrencies by design are decentralized. There isn't a central bank in the middle of it. So if you lose it, or the person that you were exchanging with runs off with it, that's it.
There's no
How do you get
regulator, no
recourse?
police, no.
How do you can go to the police certainly, but trying to then identify where was this, where did it happen, and then how do you get that back? And before I moved to Nairobi in December last year, I lived in Vienna in Austria, and I had my 4 kids at an indoor trampolining birthday party, which really on reflection was not a great idea. It's 40 degrees outside, the sweat's dripping off the ceiling, it's 120 decibels. But in this place, in the back end of an industrial estate, where you book online using an encrypted email and all the payments in cash, sitting in reception of a kids' trampoline centre is an ATM, a cash machine for cryptocurrencies. Now, I'm not saying they're money launderers, but I'd say if they were money launderers, that'd probably be how I'd do it. Because it's paid in cash, there's no internet link into them, it's all paid in cash with an encrypted email. Why in a kids' trampoline centre do you have a Bitcoin ATM where you can put cash in, turn it into Bitcoin, or withdraw?
Because kids have parents.
Yeah.
But then also, you cannot run away.
I raise a quizzical eyebrow.
You also cannot run away from the image of innocence that it displays as well.
And my face is not an image of innocence. Reach that point.
When you're getting into a place like that, a kid's trampoline park, you're not necessarily thinking that there's anything to do with economic
Precisely.
espionage
So,
taking place.
if you're a man or a woman of badness, that's how you do it.
Yes.
Because it's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
And simply, it could be the most basic thing of evading tax. Right? So cryptocurrencies aren't taxed because there's no central authority to do that.
Essentially, what do you tax? Really?
Exactly. That's it. That's the question. How do you tax something that you can't identify where it is, the legal jurisdiction, and how it goes forward? And that's some of the work that we're doing around the world, is to help the financial regulators put policies in place, because it's like lots of these things. You can say, no, we're going to make it illegal, or we're not going to deal with this. It doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
Because it's still there.
Neil, so then looking at the work that the UN does and is doing, how then do you deal with the sheer magnitude, the spectrum from, children on the internet to, cryptocurrency who may or may not be, and then dealing with terrorism? I mean, at the very furthest end of the spectrum. How are you dealing with all of this on a daily,
So there's two ways
basis?
of attacking this. First off is conversations like this with government, with investigators, with intelligence officers, help to build that skill set. The biggest problem I face, that out of the UN's core budget, I get $0. So I have to bid, I have to go to other governments and say, will you fund our work to allow us to do this? Because that keeps Kenya safe, keeps Uganda safe, Tanzania, wherever we're working. It also keeps those donor governments who support us. But I think it should be much broader than that. You look at internet service providers, you look at telecoms companies, banks, they should be investing in this because it protects their investment. And then we have to be doing this much more in schools. This is principally a conversation that has to start in education from the first day your kids are in school, to understand what swiping across a device looks like and understanding the risk that goes with that, but also building the law enforcement and the legal response to this. All of this is a full spectrum effect at hitting the problem. But I said earlier on, crime and terrorism are principally driven by profit. So we need to be able to identify where the profits are made, how they're cashed out, and how we have impact against that. Because when I was a cop, when I spoke to criminals and they didn't necessarily know that I was a cop and it was more of a covert role, they didn't really care about going to jail. It was an occupational hazard. Right? They know they're going to go to jail at some point. But when you take their money off them, that really irritates them, and it's disruptive. Because if I'm a drug trafficker and you're a weapons trafficker and we both rely on you to launder our money or to move our cash, and you lose that, and that's publicly displayed, then that trust is gone. And how do we get the expertise to move this? And how do we do that? So it's hitting the money, seizing it, restraining it, recovering it, then having policy and legislation in place to put it back into the licit economy, so that you take money out of crime and terror and you put it back into the government.
Okay, so looking at that and looking at crime and terror, for just on those two for a minute, oftentimes when we read about, you know, the antics of terrorism, and they used to say that, you know, you knock off one cell and 50 others have grown when you cut off that one head. So in terms of mitigating response, is there enough, or is there capacity to be able to, you know, once, because these things are coming up. 10 years ago, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today didn't even exist.
Exactly.
So in terms of the expertise or the mitigating response for these things that are coming up in terms of crime on the internet, terrorism, money, etc., is there enough in terms of a response to the vices that are coming up?
So you can always increase the response, right? There's never going to be enough of law enforcement to deal with the threats. Kenya has very,
is there enough capacity?
Yeah, so Kenya has very good skill sets. I think if we look across DCI, across the prosecutors, across the judicial system, across NIS, they've got really good skill sets. What we can offer is to enhance that and grow that if I get funded to do that. But it's not just about looking at your own country, because these threats come from outside the country as much as from within. So we have to get equity around the world, that if you have a threat that, I don't know, 10 years ago you said it's from a country next door, but now it might be from 10 countries away on the other side of the world. We have to have equity and legal reciprocity in doing that, where you can share intelligence and evidence quickly and efficiently. And that's where some of the challenges are that we see. If I, for example, was back in investigation land and I seize my own iPhone 12 and have to download it, how long does that take? How long does it take me to find the evidence on that? Can I share that evidence with the country where I think the criminal or the terrorist is? Right. Do they have law to allow us to do that? And that's what our job within not just UNODC, but the UN family in Kenya, is to help to grow that and to make that a reality. Because economic security is national security, which is why all of this stuff is so important to blend in together. And sometimes putting this into reality, back when I lived in Vienna, I was going through cancer treatment and I was going for a CT scan one day, and the CT scanner was offline because of a ransomware attack. Wow. Where the hospital had been targeted, and you've got this blue screen of death saying, if you don't pay X amount of cryptocurrency in 24 hours, you will never get access back to your stuff. And the advice that we give is don't pay, okay? It's a fundamentally dishonest relationship. It is someone who you don't know promising to give you back access to something if you pay them, and there's no guarantee that they do it.
What have you seen or witnessed or experienced as being a problem that, say, third world countries have with putting in place laws and policies that would tackle these very issues that we are discussing, and more so the proliferation probably of the use of something like cryptocurrency?
So, really insightful question. And I think the biggest challenge we see are countries that say, this ain't a big problem for us right now, this is a future threat. I remember speaking with a government a few years ago who said, this is not a problem for us. Okay, first off, our people wouldn't do this. We're not like that. This has never happened to us. And the problem with that is it's a lack of understanding of the threat picture. And I think sometimes accepting that these threats are there, that's a really big challenge to take on. Because once you accept that it's there and you've got to do something about it, then what do you do? Because you look at some of the major cyber attacks around the world on some of the biggest countries with the biggest investment in this, and you think, well, they couldn't stop it. What can we do here? And it's back to understanding your threat. What are the biggest things that you have to keep secure? Fundamentally securing around that and making sure you have the ability to do something about that. And that's our job.
You know, I ask this question is because in many third world countries, the biggest criminals are the leaders, the people who make policy, the people who determine the laws we have in the country, the people who've been mandated, that elected leaders. Now, if they themselves, and they are fairly knowledgeable individuals, if they are the ones who you have to go to operationalize these things, and they can see how that would interfere with certain core businesses that they have, will they really encourage the promotion of this?
It's a really good question, and we see this in lots of countries around the world. And I think the way to ask that question is, and I've dealt with state-based cyber attacks in the past where one country wants to blame the other of doing it. And even that is not an easy thing to do, because guaranteeing that country A is accusing country B, maybe it was country C pretending to be country B. And that's a whole bigger discussion on risk and mitigation to that. But in question where you think there's corruption and corrupt practice, then the question is, you go back to government and you say, here are the problems that we see. What are your solutions?
Yeah.
Okay, rather than, I don't think accusing is necessarily the way of solving it, because it often just closes doors down. But certainly an approach that I took with a country not in this continent in the past was saying, these are the challenges we see. Some are saying that it's originating from you. I'm not saying that, but we do seem to see that it's coming through your infrastructure. What can you do to be part of the solution? And the irony is, everybody faces the same risk. Everybody faces the same economic, financial, security risks in different scales, but they're principally the same. So we all want to stop this stuff. But then we have bits of government in every country trying to develop their own capability to do the same thing. And I had a conversation with a police chief and a head of state a couple of years ago, who were explaining this really what we'd call an offensive cyber capability that they've developed to attack cyber criminals, to hack into them. And I said, wow, that's great.
Nice.
What happens when a corrupt cop steals it? Or what happens when you lose control of it and it's used to attack your next door neighbour who's quite big and angry in country terms?
Yeah.
And you could sort of see the colour draining on their face and say, have you created your own state-based attack as a method that you thought was going to counter criminality? So all of these things we have to think our way through, and it's often tempting for technologists designing this stuff to do the most intrusive stuff or the most highly skilled capabilities. We've got to think through the risks on this, because none of us want this being used against us. So try not to design it in the first place, or at least put mitigation and risk management stuff around it. And that starts with conversations like this, which is why the job that you guys do is so important.
So what do you do on a daily basis? Somebody's actually sent to ask questions. So
I do on a daily basis.
what is Neil's 8 to 5 like? Do you meet?
I wish it was 8 to 5. My day starts around 5:30, 5:45. And it'll be when the kids are back at school, it's getting the kids up, getting them fed, getting ready to go out the door. And then normally in the office around 7:30. And because we cover so many different bits of the piece, we're doing, for example, we have the EU have their biggest investment in sub-Saharan Africa in Kenya through work that we're doing to help develop the criminal justice system and alternatives to going to jail, because that's a really important piece of work that we're doing with the Chief Justice here. So it might be meeting with the Chief Justice or with a minister or with a head of state. I am head of mission for 13 countries, so a lot of my time is not here. So it could be being in Somalia, dealing with my staff up there who are working under incredible high-risk threat every day, where Al-Shabaab and others are trying to take them out on a day-to-day basis, and working with our Somali counterparts. It could be in New York, dealing with the Security Council or the General Assembly. It changes on a day-to-day basis. But the best part is when I get to do stuff like this, because we can actually then talk about what we do and try to bring the investment into us to show that, actually, what does the UN do for you? Well, it's stuff like this. We actually help to keep people safe in real life. The work that we do saves lives every day, because it keeps kids from being harmed online. It helps to get victims detected and safeguarded, helps to create the ability to bring people that do this to harm. And when we look at those that harm the most vulnerable in our society, they're the highest risk people as well. So when we help countries to do something about that and take them out, well, that's a pretty damn good day. And then going home, eventually, then I'll usually get home, cook the dinner, or Mrs. Walsh will have done that, get the kids to bed, and then I have to do another 2 or 3 hours work each night, normally before bed at around midnight.
And then up at 5 again.
And then up at 5 again.
Okay.
And this is a job you actually applied for.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. I've had cancer twice. I've had a cardiac arrest. I've had brain hemorrhages. I've been close to death on so many occasions. The fact that I get to do stuff like this every day, I'm bloody lucky. So you take the moment that you've got and the opportunities that you've got, and to get to live and work here, I'm a very, very lucky boy.
All trying to make
That's
the world a better
true.
place, indeed.
Yep.
Neil, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you all very much indeed.
Neil Walsh is the regional representative for Eastern Africa at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. We've been talking about tackling cybercrime and how we all can stay safe online. Part of our Justice Thursdays conversation, this time approaching it from that perspective. We'd love to have you back.
Love to. Thank you so much.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.